Hey friends, welcome back to the Homegrown Hopes podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin, and I'm so excited for you to join me here today in this little corner of my living room. And if you listened to last week's episode, then you heard me chatting about how we were really trying to lean into the rhythm of winter. I feel like this time of year, especially like the month of January, we're in February now, but it was the end of January when I recorded. It's just a time of year when we're very much encouraged to set new goals and new plans for the year. And I love that. I am a planner. I enjoy that. But I also really enjoy the rest that comes with winter. And so last week's episode was really just all about how we're really leaning into the season, what that means, kind of hibernating and still being productive in this season, but maybe just not so hustle, 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 because the rest of the year is very, very full. And so I think that our bodies and our souls need a little bit of time to rest. So that's what last week's episode was about. And you got to hear the new commercial from our new season sponsor, which is Healing Nutrition. You'll hear that commercial later on in this episode. And today we're going to talk about something that I've touched on just a little bit in last week's episode, and that is reading and taking the time to actually pick up a book and slow down and be intentional with our time and read. It's really easy in today's culture to always be go, go, go. And maybe this is just me and some psycho part of my mind that I feel like if I'm not producing something or doing something productive, that it's a waste of time. And so last week's episode was really diving into how we are breaking that mindset. I'm breaking that mindset. You can do what you want. I'm trying to embrace the rest. And reading is one of the ways that I do that. So I did mention, and I'll talk about it here, I do a lot of audiobooks, especially throughout the busier times of year. Audiobooks are my best friend. I keep a little earbud in when I'm doing dishes or folding clothes. And it's just a nice way to, escape a little bit. Not that I'm trying to escape the laundry and dishes, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more enjoyable. So I do a lot of audiobooks, but I also really, really love feeling a book in my hand, smelling those pages. And I don't know, I don't have like a Kindle or anything like that. I would probably love it, but I'm just fighting that. I love books and I have a problem. My husband will tell you I have a book problem. This bookshelf right here is nothing. We have still not unpacked everything. Yep, I'm sure if you've listened, we moved in the last few months towards the end of last year. And books is one of those things that we have not found a space for yet. We're going to have to probably make a whole wall of our basement a bookshelf. That's what I want to do anyway. And I love books, and I feel like a good home library is such a treasure. So I was just this is a very chill episode. I was just going to kind of talk about what I've been reading this winter. And by reading, I don't mean that I have actually sat down and read every single one of these. A couple of them were audiobooks, but most of them, like I said, in the wintertime, I'm more of a physical book reader. So I took a picture of my book list because I will forget.
If you felt the pull to slow down, to create and cultivate a more homegrown life that's simple and fulfilling, and to truly enjoy the magic of ordinary days, then friend, you found your place. I'm Caitlin. I'm a barefoot, Blue Ridge, homegrown mama, and this is the Homegrown Hopes podcast. We'll chat about everything from gardening and scratch cooking to homeschooling and motherhood. With some sarcasm sprinkled in, of course, because I am my daddy's daughter, and Lord knows I'm fluent in that. Just know that whatever it is we're discussing, I am by no means an expert, and I'll never claim to be. I'm just sharing my experiences, the good and the bad, and making the most of the little moments in between. I'm so excited you're here, and so humbled that you've chosen to follow along and hopefully join me in cultivating our homegrown hopes.
Homesteaders, listen up. Are you ready to take control of your health and find real answers that address the root cause of your concerns? Let me introduce you to Healing Nutrition, a private nutrition practice that's all about supporting your journey to better health with whole foods and personalized care. At Healing Nutrition, Mandy Nix, a fellow homesteader and functional registered dietitian, is here to support you with weight loss and sustainable lifestyle changes, managing diabetes, prediabetes, and thyroid issues, gut health, and improving digestion. You might recognize Mandy as the owner of Henry River Farms. That is where we host the Holistic Homestead Conference. Mandy and her family grow and raise their own food, making whole, natural eating a way of life. Her passion for fresh, nutrient-rich foods shines through in her work, helping clients connect their health goals with real, sustainable nutrition. Mandy also offers nutrition testing, like food sensitivity and nutrient deficiency testing, to cover the why behind your symptoms. And it doesn't stop there. Healing Nutrition's Katrina Detter, another experienced dietitian, specializes in weight management, PCOS support, helping you build a healthy relationship with food. Here's the best part. Most insurance plans cover nutrition counseling with a dietitian at 100%. That means you can get personalized support without the extra cost. If you're ready to feel your best and align your health journey with the whole food lifestyle that you love, visit mandynixnutrition.com or call 828-513-0217 to book an appointment and learn more. Healing Nutrition, rooted in whole foods, rooted in health. Go check them out today and take the first step toward a healthier whole food lifestyle. Okay, so the first one on the list, and also, so I have a corresponding blog post that goes with this podcast episode, and it really deep dives into kind of why I chose the books that I chose, how I maybe inadvertently kind of read with the seasons a little bit. Like, my books tend to follow a theme, and you'll kind of see that reflected in the list that I'm sharing here in a minute. But for example, in the fall, that is when I want to read Alice Hoffman books. And, oh gosh, what's her name? Adrienne Young. She's a local author. I really enjoy her books. It's got a little bit of I'm not into the whole fantasy thing. I really don't get into that. If that's you, then that's great. That's just not my genre. But that's about as fantastical as I'll get. Some Alice Hoffman books that are just a little, quirky. I love reading those in the fall. So in the winter time, you will definitely see a more winter theme in my books that's kind of intentional and sometimes not. So first book on the list is A Winter's Tale. Obviously a winter book. This is a book that I've read a couple of times, and there are a handful of books that I go back and read again. And sometimes and in the case of this book, I did really enjoy it, but also it's because I kind of rushed through it a little bit. I need to finish the book and know where we're going with this, and then I'll read it again and appreciate it more in depth. And this is one of those books that I feel like you really have to slow down and read to appreciate. It's a little bit fantastical. Like, when I first was reading it, some of the things that happened, I thought, is he dreaming? Is this really what I'm reading right now? But I do love books that kind of break the mold a little bit, that they're not so far out there. Like, no, again, no offense, but there's no dragons or anything, but there is a flying horse. So take what you will. But I did really enjoy this book. It was a book that challenged me in a lot of ways because it's very wordy. It's very wordy. In fact, you could read an entire page just talking about a word and vocabulary. And so it was one of those books that was not just a fluff read, not really mindless in the earbud. It was a book that I read in my hands, and it's one that took a little bit of work for me. I have read it a couple of times now. I read it for the first time, maybe last year or the year before, I don't know, but I read it again this winter and really took my time with it because I know how it ends now, so I don't need to rush through and see what happens. And just really took my time and savored the writing. I really enjoyed it. Again, it hurts my head in some places. I have to reread a couple times and really slow down and and think about it, but I did enjoy that. So that is A Winter's Tale. Also, there is a movie based on the book, and it's a beautiful movie. I love the actress. I cannot remember her name now that I'm on screen. I wrote it in the blog post. Um, and Colin Farrell and uh, Russell Crowe. What is her name? She was in Downton Abbey. I can't remember. Anyway, she's in the movie, and it's a beautiful movie. It's not as good as the book. Nothing ever is, but I did enjoy the movie. The next book that I read is The Frozen River. And this is one that I did enjoy it. I don't have anything bad to say about it. It was a historical fiction, which is my typical genre. I really love a historical fiction because I love to get caught up in the characters, but also learn something from a book. So I appreciate that. And it followed the life of a midwife in, I believe it was upstate New York in the wintertime. I could be wrong on that. I know that I wrote more in depth in the blog post. You can find it in the show notes. And I did really enjoy the book, and I loved hearing about the way that things were done during this time and the struggles that people went through. I do enjoy that. It is, however, one of those books that I just don't think that I will remember 5 years from now. I tend to read books and I will forget details, but there are a handful of books that stick with you. And this is not going to be one of those books for me, but I did really enjoy it. So it's called The Frozen River. The next book I actually read was probably late fall, early winter, but we have a bookstore here local to me. It's a beautiful bookstore. And they have a book club that meets once a month that my mom is in, and she's invited me to come along a few times. And this is one of the books from the book club. It's called The Caretaker by Ron Rash. I did enjoy it. And again, historical fiction. It was based on a soldier coming home from the Korean War, which I know nothing about. I'm really a nerd when it comes to books about war, specifically like World War I and II. I really am drawn to those, and the Civil War. But the Korean War, I know absolutely nothing about. So I was interested. It wasn't a super in-depth dive into that piece of his history, but it did have a little bit, just enough to pique my interest and say, wow, that's something that you should probably read more about. It's a guy that comes home to his hometown in Western North Carolina, and his family owns a general store, and it's just the story that follows him and his young wife. And it was very, very good. Heartbreaking in different ways. I think I enjoyed it the most because it actually is a town right up the mountain from where I live. There actually is that general store. I've had lunch there. So I don't think that it's actually based on the people who own that store in real life, but that was the names that they used, the name of the store, name of the town, all those things. So anytime something is, in my hometown or in my backyard, Western North Carolina, I'm drawn to it. So it really is a beautiful book. It's called The Caretaker by Ron Rash. All of these will be, they're listed in the blog post, and also I'll have links to them on Amazon, because if you're like me, when I hear about this, I like jump on and get it and have to read it. Okay, the next one is not a winter book. Okay, so The Caretaker was kind of a winter. I feel like it took place in the winter. Anyway, I read it in the winter-ish. Okay, the next one I really enjoyed. Again, a historical fiction war drama. I believe it was World War II. That's terrible that's run together for me. I'm pretty sure. Okay, not a winter book, but it's called The Kitchen Front, and I don't have the author written down here in my notes. It was so good. I really enjoyed it. It's a story about how there are women left on the home front, how they are dealing with the rations during wartime, which is something that's fascinating to me, how people survive out of nothing. And that kind of leads me into another, rabbit trail that I go down. I'm really interested in victory gardens and how people grew their own food, and how such a high percentage of the country's food was grown in people's victory gardens in their backyard. That fascinates me. So it touches on the victory garden, and it also touches on how these women are surviving and thriving and adjusting to the changing world around them. And it follows a radio show on the BBC called The Kitchen Front. and there's a competition on cooking good, delicious and nutritious foods based on the rations that they're given. It was so good. And there were a couple of recipes I mentioned, in detail in the blog post, but they were just the way that they had to use their imaginations. My mom was really good at that when we were growing up. She grew up in a way that she got creative with food, and she always did that with us. And it still amazes me to this day how she can open her refrigerator, and to a normal person, you would see nothing, and she can whip a meal together out of that. And I just find that to be such a special skill. And this book really touched on it. So I loved hearing the really, really neat foods that they came up with based on their rations. Okay, the next one was The Sweet Blue Distance by Sarah Donati. This is an author that I have read lots of her books. If you've followed me for any amount of time, then you probably know that I love Outlander. That's not by Sarah Donati. It's by Diana Gabaldon, and that deserves an entire podcast on its own. But Sarah Donati writes in a way that reminds me of Diana Gabaldon just a bit, in that she writes historical fiction in a way that it's like you're in that world. It really is so immersive, and she builds characters in a way that is just beautiful. And the books that I've read from her are books that will stick with me. Those are characters that feel like friends. Specifically, her series, Into the Wilderness, it follows a young teacher who ends up in a Mohawk Indian family in upstate New York. And it's talking about, that area being settled, and it's fascinating to me. And it is so well written that is a series that has stuck with me. I will remember it. I actually remember details from it. I remember the characters. And so she wrote this book, The Sweet Blue Distance, and it was totally not what I typically gravitate towards. This sounds awful. If you're from the Southwest, please don't be mad at me. But I've just never been drawn to that region. Like, I think she's in New Mexico in the book. And that's somewhere that is beautiful, but it's just not the kind of beautiful that I fully appreciate. Like, if I was going to go on vacation, I would not want to go to New Mexico. I'm sorry. I'm a mountain girl, and I know there are mountains there, but I want mountains with trees, like lush rainforest mountains. I'm spoiled by where I live in Western North Carolina, and I love that climate and environment. So this was in the Southwest. Totally not my normal area to read about, but it was really, really interesting. Again, a great historical fiction. I loved learning things about that area that I had no clue about, and the struggles that people face during those times. And she is she's a midwife. So that's 2 midwife books I read this year, at least 2. Apparently, I don't know. Apparently I had that theme going on in my life too. So she's a midwife. She ends up moving from New York. So she is part of the family that's in that Into the Wilderness series that I mentioned that was so, so good. She is a descendant of that family. She takes a job out west and moves out there, and it talks about her journey out there, the people that she meets, the struggles they face. It's really, really good. I love any sort of story about traveling out west, and it was a story that really sucked me in. So I enjoyed that. That was called The Sweet Blue Distance. The next one, let's see, did I skip one? I'm going to save that one to last. Okay, next one was The Girl on the Mountain. I did enjoy that one. It's one that I have nothing bad to say about. It was in, I think, South Carolina. Maybe. I don't know. I feel like it was in the Appalachian Mountains. Anyway, see, I forget details. It all runs together for me. It was very good. It was talking about a girl that lived near a railroad town, a mining town, and married young, and the struggles that they went through. And again, it's one of those books that I really love reading about people's ingenuity and how they adapt to different situations and the struggles that they face during those times. And I always love a book that I learn something from. And this was definitely a book like that. I will say this is one of those books that I will not remember 5 years from now. And that's nothing negative. I would read the book. I would not read it again probably. And I enjoyed it while I read it. Did not regret it, but it's just one of those that's not going to stick with me as like an epic story for the ages. This was not what that for me, but I did enjoy it. So I did mention it. Okay. Next, we're getting into my favorites, I think, on the list. Once Upon a River by, oh, I wish I had looked this up. Ariel something. It's in the blog post. Okay. It's called Once Upon a River. And it's been a while since I read this one. It was really early on in winter. And this is one of those books that it's rare for me because when I read at night, I'm tired, so I can't read for long. This is one of those books that I stayed up like for hours into the night reading. I was tired the next day because I was up till like 2 o'clock in the morning reading this book. So good. It's one of those stories that will stick with me. And it is a historical story, but it's a little bit fantastical. It follows this town, this really small village of people who live along a river. And something happens. A child goes missing. I can tell that without spoiling it. And it is just told from several different points of view of characters, and it all comes together in the end in a big way. And I mean, it was just a page turner for me. It kept me guessing. It kept me up at night. It was one of those, and I told my mom the same thing. We go back and forth. We share an Audible account, and she listens to books solely, and this is one that I had. I think I got it in a free little library here locally. If you have those, they are a gold mine. But it's one of those that I got because I like the cover, and I read it in just a few days. And I told my mom, I was like, "You have to download this one." I could not stop reading it, and she told me the same thing. She's like, "I could not stop listening to that book." So, Once Upon a River, I suggest it. It was good. Let's see. I think I only have 2 more left on the list. Okay. This is the most recent book that I read. And I had watched the movie years ago, and I'm one of those people who always wants to read the book before I watch the movie. And I watched this movie when I was pretty young, probably when it first came out, and didn't even know that it was a book. It's called Atonement. If you've watched the movie with James McAvoy and Keira Knightley, it's a great movie. I want to watch it again now that I've read the book. But it's one of those movies and I think it has Saoirse Ronan when she was young. She plays Bryony, the young girl. Fantastic actors. And it's a movie that stuck with me through the years. I remember watching it. I remember the details. I remember the end. And the book is better than the movie. I say that. The book is just as good as the movie. I will say I think the movie held its own from what I remember. I haven't watched it in several years. The book was fantastic. My only complaint is I wish that I didn't know the ending. If you've watched the movie, you know what I'm talking about, because the book was beautiful. It was one of those books similar to A Winter's Tale that is wordy. It takes a little bit of work to read it. It really took me, like I had to slow down and follow the flow. What I loved about it is the author did such a fantastic job of, how do I say this? It was told by several different characters' points of view, and the author did such a good job of, like, you're in that person's mind and following their train of thought. And I can just picture myself, especially as a mom. Like, for example, you're in the mom's head at one point, and she's laying in bed with a migraine, and she is worrying about her children individually, going through this one, I need to do this more, that one, and you can just follow the meandering trail of her thoughts. And it was so realistic to me. And then little details that the author wrote about, just so well written. It was a book that I enjoyed reading a whole lot because I enjoy vocabulary. I enjoy learning new words, which I definitely learned new words in this book. And even one section of the book, I think this is the one. It how do I say this? It had a whole part of the book, whole section, talking about a writer, an author, and how they were examining the shape of a word. I can't remember what word it was, but like the actual physical shape of the letters. And it was just, I mean, it made me sit there and pause and think, who, whose mind, what a beautiful, my mind doesn't go there naturally. I guess it's full of what's for dinner and first grade math at this point in my life. But I really, really enjoyed following the author's train of thoughts and how the author wrote that into the characters. And it was just, I really, really enjoyed the book. So if you have not read Atonement, I suggest it. It is heavy. It's a wartime drama. Again, I'm sorry if you're not into that. Apparently, that is my suggestion to you is wartime dramas. But now that I've read it, I want to watch the movie again because the movie was so well done years ago. It stuck with me, and the book is one that will stick with me. But again, if you haven't seen either one or read, oh, there's screensaver, children. If you have not watched the movie, read the book first. That is my suggestion. Read the book first. And then my last one. Okay. This is a book. Again, I watched the movie first on this one, and I would rather read the book first. I watched the movie really young. I have watched the movie probably 20 times since then. I've read the book a couple of times now. I will read it again next winter, probably. This is a book that is near and dear to my heart because it's a love letter to the place where I live, Western North Carolina. It is a Civil War time drama, which you know is right up my alley at this point. And it is a wordy book. It's a wordy book with lots of very, very descriptive vocabulary. And the author described Western North Carolina in a way that just, I mean, there were parts of the book where I got teary-eyed at how much I love where I live. I know I sound like a crazy person, but it was so beautifully written and made my heart break for home, even though I'm here. And I will say, I read this again right after the hurricane ran through Western North Carolina. We were hit by Hurricane Helene. And so my nerves are already just a little bit raw still about all of that. And reading the love letter to North Carolina that is this book, it made my heart break for North Carolina. So in a beautiful way, like I wish that I could accurately describe my feelings for a place the way that this author does. And it's Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. The book is Cold Mountain. It is so beautifully written. The characters are they're characters that will stick with you. It's a book that will stick with you. It's one of those, like I said, I will not forget. And funny enough, I watched the movie years ago. The movie is beautifully done. It's one of those that holds up to the book, in my opinion. Great actors. The cinematography was great. The soundtrack is still one of my favorite soundtracks of all time of my whole life. I'm going to tell myself on what such a nerd I am. You may not know this about me, but next to Stevie Nicks, who is usually playing at our house, my genre of music is like film scores and movie soundtracks, like Hans Zimmer and this whole Cold Mountain soundtrack. That is my jam. I love really dramatic soundtracks, movie soundtracks, film scores. So yeah, that's the nerdy side of me. I absolutely love the soundtrack that goes with the movie. It's lots of folk songs, bluegrass music, Appalachian heritage music. It's so beautiful. And I named my daughter after this book. It was after the movie. I hadn't read the book yet at the time that she was born. My daughter's name's Ada, and that's the main character's name. And I watched the movie in like middle school or early high school. And from the time I watched it, I knew that was my daughter's name. I stuck with that from that time. Her name in the movie was Ada Monroe. That's her name in the book. And my daughter's name is Ada. And I just knew for however many years, let's see, 15-ish years, that was the name. So it's one that has stuck with me. The movie always stuck with me. It's one of my favorites. The book, now that I've read it a couple times, sticks with me. And it's one of those books that I have dog-eared some of the pages, and I will go back and just read the author's description of a mountain range or the way a morning feels. And it's beautifully written. So that rounds out my list of my winter reads so far. We still have some winter left, but those have been my favorites so far. So I would love to hear from you guys. You can interact. You can, if you're watching on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and comment. That helps the algorithm so much, whatever that mess is. We appreciate that. But I would love to hear what you're reading this winter. Do you prefer an actual physical book in your hand, or do you like audiobooks? You can also interact over on Instagram. The handle is @homegrownhopes. Of course, my website, homegrownhopes.com. And I would love to hear from you guys. Also, my email is below. I love it when someone who has listened to a podcast episode reaches out and says, "Oh, I really loved this part of the episode," or "This is how I do this." I have actually had people reach out, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, somebody's actually listening. This is beautiful." So I'm always looking for book suggestions. So please send me your book suggestions, even if it's not winter related. Yeah, I would love to hear them. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. This is coming out on Friday, on Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day. And I hope you have a great weekend. And I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.